Angeles and Denver and New York aren't held at risk from Kim Jong-un having a nuclear weapon. That tweet is entirely consistent with that policy.
There is no turnaround. What he has basically said is, yes, there could be a time where we talk to North Korea, but a lot of things have to happen before that actually takes place. They have to stop testing. They have to be willing to talk about banning their nuclear weapons. Those things have to happen.
Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palka is live in Seoul, South Korea for us this morning. What more, Greg, can you tell us about the new talks?
Well, Sandra, yeah, it is just past midnight here on a blowy night in Seoul. In just about 10 hours, there could be some very historic talks happening about 30 miles from where we are. For the first time in more than 2 years, the two sides, North and South Korea, will be in formal conversations. They'll be meeting face-to-face in Panmunjom on the DMZ. Now, they'll be meeting primarily about North Korea's participation in next month's Winter Olympics here. It looks like as of today that will happen, but there's still a lot of details to be worked out, but also to be discussed ways to improve relations between the regime of Kim Jong-un and the South. After this terrible past year, a lot of people are hoping for success, including the United States. Take a listen.
President Trump himself from the beginning has said he would talk to Kim Jong-un, and he's recently reaffirmed that and said, you know, I'll get on the phone with him. So South Korea is opening a channel that could have positive indirect effects to make it easier for the Americans to start talking to the North Koreans at a senior level.
For now, though, the U.S. on the sidelines of these conversations. Sandra.
Greg, what's the reaction there in South Korea?
Well, you can imagine there is a lot of anticipation for these talks. It's a long time coming. It's been a very tough year dealing with the situation in the Korean Peninsula with the nukes and the missiles coming from the north. Now, they're clearly aimed at the U.S. Folks here feel they're a little bit caught in the crossfire. There are conservative elements here that are concerned that this more dovish government might give away the farm in these talks. Certainly there are concerns in the U.S. Washington has been vocal about worries that maybe North Korea is trying to drive a wedge between South Korea and the U.S. Still, there have been gestures, the delay of U.S. and South Korea military drills until after the Olympics, as well as some warmish words from President Trump. Here's what the locals think.
I'm very hopeful.
Why?
Because there are chance to communicate.
South Korea and North Korea are so bad right now. And if they talk so, maybe we could get better.
I believe communication is necessary for whatever issue. And even Trump is supporting the issue right now, from what I know.
By the way, Monday was the birthday, we believe, of Kim Jong-un. We think he's 34, but there was no celebration there. There hasn't been celebration, perhaps because of the confusion over his age. Certainly some kind of success in these talks. Well, that would be a belated birthday present. Back to you.
Greg Palka, live in Seoul, South Korea for us this morning.
Meanwhile, back at home now, all of Congress officially back in Washington, D.C. House lawmakers getting ready to go back to work after a holiday break. Meanwhile, presidential retreat over the weekend for Republican congressional leaders at Camp David, talking about how to advance their agenda while also expressing hope for bipartisan progress in Congress.
We went into DACA and how we're going to do, and we hope that we're going to be able to work out an arrangement with the Democrats. I think it's something that they'd like to see happen. It's something certainly that I'd like to see happen.
We hope that 2018 will be a year of more bipartisan cooperation at the president's agenda.
Well, Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, live on the Hill, knows where this is going. So, morning, Mike. Where do things stand heading into a critical week on these budget talks? Let's start there.
Well, Bill, while a lot of the congressional leaders have been talking about numbers for a budget agreement, we're getting a sense later today of where rank and file members are as House members make their way back to the Capitol. We're just 11 days out from the government running out of money. And the House Majority Leader says if Democrats insist on immigration being included in a budget deal, that there's plenty good reason for more security.
Look, if we don't deal with the security and with chain migration, we will be back before us on a DACA issue in a few years. And that's the wrong thing for America to do. We need to maintain the rule of law, deal with those individuals that were brought here, no fault of their own, but actually have a border security so it does not happen again.
Time is precious with the government running out of money a week from Friday. Republicans say the only ones talking about a government shutdown are House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi and some of her allies, Bill.
Interesting. We'll watch all that. What are Democrats saying about the immigration component or the possibility during these talks?
Well, Democrats are negotiating like they feel like they have some leverage because some Democrat votes will be needed to pass a budget agreement. Democrats at this stage are pushing back on the president's call for a wall.
I don't think there's anybody who disagrees that we need strong border security. And if the president wants to work with us to make sure that we have strong border security, let's do that. But the idea of spending some $18 billion on a wall that most people think will not do what he says it will do does not make any sense.
We are expecting bipartisan talks at the White House on immigration. We will see if they can find some common ground on enforcement and border security at that point.
On we go. Thanks, Mike Emanuel on the Hill today. Thank you, Mike. Sandra.
So the House and Senate gearing up for another big, busy week in Washington as Congress forges ahead with President Trump on a packed agenda here at home and overseas. John McCormick is senior writer for the Weekly Standard. John, it's every week's a big week. Where do you even begin? Because here we've got this deadline to fund the government coming up, but the immigration and infrastructure obviously are key issues for many top Republicans. So where do you start?
Yeah, well, I think immigration is the most interesting issue just in terms of politics and policy coming up in 2018. You heard President Trump say over the weekend at Camp David that if they don't get the wall, there's not going to be any fix for DACA or for immigrants who came here illegally as minors. Democrats, they seem like they've done a big flip-flop on border security, on a border fence at least. Back in 2006, people like Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer voted for an additional 700 miles of fencing. They've kind of flipped on that, I think, in no small part because President Trump has made this such a big priority. So I guess the real question is, would there be some trading of increased border security, if not a big, beautiful wall that President Trump refers to, in exchange for fixing DACA?
And as far as the strategy that we may see from this president when it comes to getting immigration reform done, you wonder what the approach will be, because we saw such a different strategy from this president when it came to tax reform, sort of a stay out of the way strategy compared to the Obamacare repeal, which obviously wasn't very successful. So how do you think the president goes at it? What's his role in getting this done?
It depends. The president obviously talks a lot about the art of the deal, and so I guess a big question is whether or not his insistence that the wall must happen for a DACA fix, is that really a line in the sand? Or is that a red line for him, or is that simply his opening ask? I think we really don't know that question. Obviously, last year he had kind of gone back and forth on this issue. He ended up coming out of one meeting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, seeming to come to an agreement on DACA that didn't include a border wall. That was walked back later, but we just really don't know where this is heading. There are obviously other priorities like infrastructure. Some Republicans even want to take another crack at health care, but again, it seems like they're going to have a tough time either getting unanimity among Republicans with only 51 votes in the Senate, or getting bipartisan support from Democrats on these other priorities.
And then you just heard there at the top of the hour, CIA Director Mike Pompeo talking North Korea and how to proceed there. Diplomacy, he said, obviously is still the answer for this administration, but he said this is a president that is showing he's going to do what's necessary to protect the American people. So I just wonder how we should all be looking at these talks between the North and the South. Is this a good thing?
I really don't know. It depends on what comes out of this. I think that our options are not too strong. It's going to depend much more on, China has ability to pressure North Korea in a way that South Korea doesn't. I suppose South Korea could offer them, some incentives, some carrots, if will, while China would be more, threatening North Korea with the stick of sanctions. But we'll just have to see what exactly comes out of here to know whether anything at all is accomplished.
If this is a message on the flip side from the North trying to drive a wedge between the United States and South Korea, you wonder, should we be open to talks with North Korea?
Well, you heard the president say over this weekend that he was open to talks, and Nikki Haley, in that clip that was just played on air, she said that there would need to be all sorts of preconditions met before they need to stop the testing, before we even sit down at the table with them.
All right, John McCormick, it is shaping up to be another busy day and week for this administration. Thanks for covering it for us.
Thank you.
See what comes out of that tomorrow. General Mattis meets with President Trump at the White House while that happens in Korea. In the meantime, Senator Lindsey Graham now calling for a second special counsel.
I want to find out if the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation had a political bias against Trump or Clinton to the point that it was a sham investigation. I don't know all these things, but I can tell you somebody needs to look.
Wow, there's Lindsey Graham sounding off as President Trump claims he believes Hillary Clinton and the DNC colluded with Russia, denying there was any collusion with his campaign. Ahead, Judge Napolitano on where this goes next.
Plus, a travel nightmare at one of the nation's busiest airports after a snowstorm and a water main break leaves thousands of passengers stranded. And this.
We could look back a year from now and say the warning signs were there and we did not do enough.
If this book is to be believed, and I think it is credible, then it is actually quite frightening for the American people.
So you have a sample there. Several members of the mainstream media raising questions about President Trump's mental state. This after a blowout book draws attention to it. So what's this all about? We shall explore in a moment.
I spend 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost 2 years next to candidate Trump. And I've had the high privilege of continuing to speak to the president as he has assumed that office. And I can tell you this, never have I seen anything like this. Michael Wolff hasn't spent any time with the candidate.
Got some breaking news from the White House. Follow this now. Fox News learning the Trump team will not shield 200,000 Salvadoran immigrants living under what's called a temporary protected status. That program provided humanitarian relief for foreign nationals hit by natural disasters. In this case, there was a devastating earthquake 16 years ago, 2001 in El Salvador. The Obama administration extended the program for 18 months in September of 2016. That extension expires today. Now, Kirstjen Nielsen, the DHS secretary, says getting these people to a permanent solution is a much better plan than having them live 6 months to 12 months to 18 months. That's a quote now. This may all wrap into this whole immigration debate, so we'll watch it for you. But it's news from the White House breaking right now, 10:16 here in New York.
When you hear him put out that tweet, stable genius, it's kind of like Richard Nixon, I'm not a crook. Right. It raises serious questions about his mental capacity, his ability to process information, his impulse control.
If we do have a president who has some fitness issues, even though he says he's like really smart, there are some problems.
He has put this question of his competency by responding to it in the theatrical way he has in the middle of the conversation.
The media seizing on questions raised by the author of the new tell-all Fire and Fury about President Trump's mental fitness for the Oval Office, leading some Trump allies and the president himself to push back strongly against those claims. John Sununu was White House chief of staff to President George H.W. Bush and is a former governor of New Hampshire, which is why I would love to ask you, Governor, as someone who did serve as White House chief of staff, how this White House is handling all this.
Good morning, Sandra. Look, it's absolutely irresponsible for the Democrats and the press to exploit what is a style that the president has. And to understand it all, you've got to go back and look at his history. Donald Trump grew up in Queens in the 50s and 60s. I grew up in Queens in the 50s and 60s, a couple of miles from him. The style every day was to go into verbal combat with your friends constantly. You argued about the Giants versus the Yankees versus the Dodgers. When you played stickball or stoop ball, those were just frameworks for additional verbal combat. The president goes into the real estate and construction business in New York, and in that environment, you had to pound your subcontractors to get price down and delivery on time. And then he goes on television, and what people loved about The Apprentice was his combative management style. He runs a campaign the same way. Now he's president. He wants to achieve things for the country domestically and around the world. Why in his mind should he change his style? It is his natural style. We may not always be thrilled with some of the language that comes out of that, but that's the way he is. And for the Democrats and the press to exploit it is irresponsible.
Well, as a result, he's got his team out there defending those comments, such as CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Here he is.
The president is engaged He understands the complexity. He asks really difficult questions. I've watched him take the information that the intelligence community delivers and translate that into policies that are of enormous benefit to America. Statements like the one Mr. Wolf made about how we all think about the president, they're just ridiculous on their face.
And the president himself, Governor, took to Twitter to defend all this, saying, I've had to put up with the fake news from the first day I announced that I would be running for president. Now I have to put up with a fake book written by a totally discredited author. Ronald Reagan had the same problem and handled it well. So will I. Is it necessary that they defend this in the capacity that they are, putting Trump's allies out there, so many from his team over the weekend out there defending the president? Does that just shine more light on this?
Sandra, with the talking points the Democrats have been circulating to the media, it is clear that there's an all-court press on by the Democrats and their friends in the liberal media. And the White House is just trying to respond to that. Pompeo's comments are extremely important, I think, because I think one of the most stressful moments for any president is that morning briefing from the CIA in which you're really discussing all the potential hotspots around the world. What was more irrational, what was more a sign of derangement, in my opinion, was Obama's unwillingness to have his presidential daily briefing every day. The president, I think, handles that well, and I think he handles the substance of issues as well as possible. I go back to what I said at the beginning. What people are focusing on is style, which we may not all be thrilled with, but it's a style that's brought success, and he's using that to get additional success for the country.
I've only got a few seconds left, Governor, but you've got to think this is causing a lot of frustration inside that White House. While they've got an ambitious agenda for 2018, having to spend so much time defending the things said in that book's got to be difficult. Last comment.
That's the style, and that's the desire the Democrats have in pushing this around to their friends in the media.
Yeah, Governor, thanks for coming on this morning. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
On the topic of immigration, remember this from President Bill Clinton in office.
It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
That was 23 years ago, and that was them, but Democrats now changing their tune as Republicans search for a bipartisan deal. Will they get it? We'll check that out coming up moments.
Plus, a police cruiser is found in front of a liquor store, but it wasn't the cops who drove it there. Details on a wild joyride next.
He had a 40 ounce, it was open, he was getting ready to take a drink. He gets on the ground, he complies, he's like, okay, you got me.
A Northern California man caught on camera taking a stolen patrol car for a joyride. Take a look at this. Authorities say the 22-year-old suspect was under the influence of alcohol when he stole the vehicle that was left unattended by officers who were responding to a call over the weekend. After crashing into a telephone pole, police say he took off again and made a stop at a liquor store for beer. A bystander detained him before he could get away and waited for officers to arrive. Zachary Zamaha charged with DUI and stealing a patrol car.
Wow.
Scary stuff.
Rough night. Chaos unfolding at New York City's JFK airport after last week's winter storm. This was a mess. Flight delays were already bad. Then a water main breaks in one of the terminals, and it looked like a flood out there. Laura Ingle live from the airport in Queens with more on this. I mean, chilly temperatures over the weekend, well below zero, warming up now. But how are things at JFK now, Laura?
Hi, Bill. Well, man, the list of problems that piled up for passengers was truly staggering. It all started last week with the bone-chilling temperatures and massive snowstorm started to really slow things down here at JFK, but then that set off a chain reaction of bad news. Really bad news for a lot of passengers. New York's busiest airport had to close on Thursday as hundreds of flights from around the country were canceled, stranding thousands of passengers. Equipment started freezing. Bag handling was delayed. Passengers were stuck on planes for hours. The situation quickly spiraled and reportedly caused the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey to call federal aviation officials to block more international flights from coming in. Then the disorder and disarray kicked up a notch yesterday when a water main broke inside Terminal 4, where stranded passengers and an ocean of luggage was piling up.
Initial flooding that took place was quite severe, and it wound up with 3 inches of water
on on 2/3, the southern 2/3 of the Terminal 4 arrivals area. The water cascaded out onto the frontage and into the inner roadway. With the freezing temperatures, that meant that ice formed, extremely dangerous to passengers and to others.
It was a soggy, freezing mess for sure. The executive director of the Port Authority and New York Senator Chuck Schumer both calling for a review of the weekend problems, which appears to stem from a massive coordination breakdown between the private terminal operators and the airlines. Meanwhile, frustration levels peaked with passengers trying to get home and get their bags.
Let us know what's going on, that's all, instead of us standing there for a couple hours. Then now they're saying anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, maybe 8 hours to get your luggage. A lot of us are out of town, so there's kids flying across the country without their luggage for school.
Oh yeah, mayhem, frustrating, mayhem, a mess, a disaster, a balagan, as they say in Hebrew.
And as of last hour, there are 26 flights that have been canceled today, 81 delays going on right now. So a bit of an improvement, but certainly it's not back to normal here as of yet. Bill?
Tough road. Thank you, Laura Ingle there live at JFK for that.
I'm sure by now you've heard a few stories. The struggle is real getting in and out of JFK for a lot of people and getting their luggage, even if they land on time. Hours waiting for their luggage.
It was really cold here in the Northeast over the week.
Oh, yeah.
I think I left my apartment twice in 2 days. Everybody I know stayed home. It's probably
It's that kind of weather.
Good advice, yes.
All right. Well, turning the tables on Russian collusion, should there be a special prosecutor focusing on the Clintons instead of just on President Trump and his campaign? What the president is saying next.
Also, speaking of the Russian matter, 2 top Republican senators now pushing for a criminal investigation of the author of the Trump dossier. Do they have a case? The judge is on deck to answer that next.
I think your viewers, our fellow citizens, want an FBI that is bias-free and dispassionate. The other issue is, even laying bias aside, did the FBI engage in a process that we can have confidence in?
The Russia investigation back in the headlines, speaking before reporters at Camp David, President Trump reiterating there was no collusion between his campaign and Moscow, but also saying that is not the case with Hillary Clinton and the DNC.
There has been collusion between Hillary Clinton, the DNC, and the Russians. Unfortunately, you people don't cover that very much, but the only collusion is between Hillary and the Russians and the DNC and the Russians.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington covering all this for us. Good morning, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Senior Democrat, in response to the statements over the weekend, says the Clintons are under scrutiny because of White House pressure. Fox News first reported on the Clinton Foundation that it was the subject of a federal investigation in January 2016. And a source now tells Fox News the Justice Department is investigating allegations the foundation used pay-to-play tactics when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. This investigation is led by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they are considering whether the foundation violated tax law. Multiple witnesses, we understand, have been interviewed. On the Sunday talk shows, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee said the investigations are not the result of new evidence, but rather, he alleged, political pressure.
If they are investigating Hillary Clinton, it doesn't take a genius, let alone a stable genius, to see why. It's not because there's some new evidence that's come to light. It's because they're being badgered by the White House to do it.
Foundation also takes the same position that they say any new investigations are politically motivated, Sandra.
And there's new information, Catherine, this morning about the so-called Trump dossier and the firm behind it, Fusion GPS.
That's right, Sandra. Fox News can now confirm that the TD Bank, complied with the House Intelligence Committee subpoena late Friday after the opposition research firm Fusion GPS lost in court to keep its financial records private. You'll remember that 70 transactions are at issue, and they appear to cover clients, 2 media companies, journalists, and researchers over a 2-year period. Meantime, the British spy Christopher Steele, who compiled the research for the dossier, was referred to the Justice Department late Friday for criminal prosecution. This case matters because it's the first known criminal referral from Congress as part of the Russia investigation. The Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, who has oversight for the FBI and Justice Department, along with his Senate colleague Lindsey Graham, believe there is a violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001, which is lying to federal confidential investigators. And based on a congressional letter, the senators believe the potential violations relate to false statements Christopher Steele made about the distribution of the unverified Trump dossier. And based on Fox's reporting, that included a half dozen American media outlets. Sandra.
All right, Catherine Herridge on it for us this morning. Thank you.
As Catherine just mentioned right there, Senators Lindsey Graham, Charles Grassley calling for an investigation into that British spy. Here is what was said just the other day.
So I want a special counsel to look at not only how Mr. Steele conducted himself, what the FBI did with the dossier, whether Mr. Orr, whose wife worked for Fusion GPS alongside Mr. Steele, what involvement did he have in the dossier? And I want to find out if the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation had a political bias against Trump for Clinton to the point that it was a sham investigation.
He said a lot. Judge Anna Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, back from his small break, short break. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Happy New Year to you. Do we need to investigate Christopher Steele? Start there.
Well, Senator Grassley makes a very good argument, and we can't really evaluate the argument because some of the information that has come to him has come in a secret capacity. So he says he has seen things which are at odds with what the FBI says Christopher Steele told them. So that would mean in his mind, and we haven't seen what he has seen, and he can't share it with us, but he can share it with the FBI, that Steele lied to the FBI. If so, this will be the same crime that General Flynn has been indicted for. If you read the statute carefully, it says lying to the FBI such that it interferes with the FBI's work. So if the FBI knows you're lying to them and it doesn't interfere with your work, is that a crime? Did the FBI know he was lying at the time he said whatever he said that Senator Grassley says is a lie? The other tape from Senator Graham, I agree these things should be investigated. Did the FBI carefully investigate Mrs. Clinton, or was the fix in from the beginning? But I do not believe we need a special counsel. The special counsel rule exists for when there is a conflict between the Attorney General and something happening in the Justice Department so that he, the Attorney General, cannot manage it, and you need an outside manager like Bob Mueller to manage it. The reason we have a special counsel for Russia is because Jeff Sessions, when he was Senator Sessions, played a leadership role in the campaign. He can't manage the investigation of the campaign when he's probably going to be a witness. But he can certainly manage the investigation of what the FBI did and didn't do when they were investigating Mrs. Clinton.
Okay, I need a flow chart. I'll slow you down just a moment.
Yeah.
You are arguing then is that we don't need an investigation to investigate our government.
No, I am saying we don't need a special counsel, another Bob Mueller, independent of the DOJ.
That's what I'm arguing here. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, apples to apples. If you're going to argue that you have not met the threshold,
correct,
by which you should be able
to appoint a special counsel.
Correct on that. You disagree with
Meaning the Justice Department and the FBI have assets to investigate other aspects of the Justice Department and the FBI without a special counsel. These special counsels are dangerous, as Manafort has argued. They often get out on a tangent and indict people for things that have nothing to do with what their charge is.
Let me get to Manafort in a moment. Just one more question on this. If you're a Republican, right, and you're sitting in these hearings and you're getting all this evidence about text messages, et cetera, don't you think something smells and should be looked at?
Yes.
So that you and I and everybody else, Republicans and Democrats alike, have the trust in there.
The reason, correct. That's the exact reason, Bill, because there must not only be justice, there must be the appearance of justice in what the FBI and the DOJ does. Look, the FBI agents are not choir boys. If they were, then bank robbers and terrorists and mobsters would roll over them. You don't want them to be choir boys. They have strong opinions. But if those political opinions are so strong that they interfere with their job, they should not be on that case.
All right. Paul Manafort's filed a civil complaint, right, against the case against him, the Department of Justice. Does he have a case?
In my opinion, no. And in my opinion, he has exacerbated his legal problems by doing that. Made them worse. If you think that the prosecutor who's prosecuting you lacks the jurisdiction, the legal authority to prosecute you, you bring that to the judge before whom your case is assigned. You do not try and drag another judge in on a civil case so that you can interrogate the prosecutor. That's the wrong
Can I take the other
way
side of
and
this?
wrong time to
so
do
Paul
it.
Manafort's attorney is going to say, look, you're operating outside the legal definition of what a special counsel is all about. You're investigating stuff that is not relevant to Russia collusion, et cetera, et cetera. And you just said what a special counsel often does is they go into areas that are that where they should not.
You make that argument to the judge in your case. You do not ask another judge to interfere with what's going on in your judge's courtroom. It just doesn't happen.
So could Manafort get a satisfactory answer based on the case against him now under the law?
The civil case that he's filed or the criminal? No, the civil case will be dismissed. That's how frivolous it is. It should have been a motion to dismiss the indictment in front of the criminal judge. She is in charge of all matters Manafort.
Do you think Manafort's in trouble here?
Yes.
Ultimately?
Yes. I think that the special prosecutor believes that Paul Manafort has information about the President of the United States, and he has indicted Manafort for essentially money laundering in the hopes that Manafort will say, Uncle, here's what I know about the president. Go easy on me. That's Bob Mueller's theory. Whether it's accurate or not, only time will tell.
Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
You're fresh. Look at this guy, Smitty. I mean, put him in.
Always, Jeff.
Thank you, guys.
All right, good to see you. Well, two former Democratic presidents talking tough on immigration.
We are still a nation of immigrants. We should be proud of it. We are also a nation of laws.
Yes, we need tougher border security and stronger enforcement measures.
But fast forward to today, and Democrats are pushing back against tougher security on the border. Why the change of heart? Our panel is on deck.
We want DACA to happen. Everybody, I think I can speak for everybody. We want John Cornyn from Texas. We all want DACA to happen, but we also want great security for our country.
An update now on some breaking news this morning. The Trump administration saying it will not shield 200,000 Salvadoran immigrants living under the temporary protected status. This program provides humanitarian relief for victims of the 2001 earthquakes. The Obama administration extended protections for 18 months back in September of 2016. That extension expires today. This all comes as the White House and Congress try to work out a bipartisan deal on immigration reform. Issues include funding for the border wall, ending chain migration, and protections for thousands of those so-called dreamers. Let's bring in Chris Bedford, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation, and Emily Sussman, the campaign director at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Chris, it's hard to see how the two parties are going to move forward here when Democrats are putting their foot down and saying we need a DACA fix tied to government funding, deadline quickly approaching, and the president saying no DACA fix without the wall.
The president is trying to negotiate from a position of strength, which he currently still has, with control of the House, a slight margin in the Senate, and control of the White House. And he's going to say that in order to allow DACA and allow the amnesty for these about 700,000 people who are here in the United States otherwise illegally, that he wants to have a change to the immigration system. He's called for something that some call radical, basically to copy our more liberal cousins to the north and have a Canadian-based merit system as opposed to just continuing amnesty. The problem here is that the GOP is not completely aligned behind that for the president. And not only that, the Democrats are not only 100% against any kind of change to chain migration or even border security, at least recently, but they've got no incentive to give him a win on the way into midterm elections. So I think that it's not going to be a bipartisan deal if it even gets done at all.
But you got to remind everybody, Emily, we're going to show you President Obama back in 2006 and Bill Clinton back in 1995 talking tough on immigration and border security. Listen to this.
Tonight, I announce I will sign an executive order to deny federal contracts to businesses that hire illegal immigrants. Let me be very clear about this. We are still a nation of immigrants. We should be proud of it. We are also a nation of laws.
It will authorize some badly needed funding for better fences and better security along our borders. Yes, we need tougher border security and stronger enforcement measures. Yes, we need more resources for customs and border agents and more detention beds.
Which leads to the question, Emily, have Democrats changed their tune on this issue?
No, absolutely not. And you could actually also include the audio you had just played in the last segment of Donald Trump saying everybody wants a fix on DACA. The reason that everybody wants a fix on DACA is because it's a self-created problem by Trump, exactly the same as it's a self-created problem today in his immigration rollout. Everything he does is just putting more chaos into the system. Look, there's already a bipartisan consensus in both houses. There should be a fix for DACA, that it is incredibly unfair to these young people that were working here legally, going to school here legally, just to pull protections. It doesn't even appear the president totally understands the implications.
I think something you're leaving out of that conversation, I'll let Chris come in on this, is that the president's not against a DACA fix. He's just making
he created the problem, so I'm glad he's not against it.
He's for a DACA fix. He just wants it tied to funding for the wall. Chris?
Well, and going around Congress, as the last president did, to grant this executive amnesty is, I would suggest, what caused the problem here. And what Donald Trump says, and I think what would assuage Republicans' concerns here, is that 700,000 people who are given, you know what, you can stay, does not become 3 million people, because every person who they know is allowed to come in here. If the line for U.S. citizenship is that you have a relative in the country, that's a really low bar. And not only that, but it sets people up to fail, and it sets communities up to become more insular and not integrate, because if you don't have the skills to succeed in a foreign country, you're going to rely more closely in this insular community, or we're going to have a separation of people and communities that is not healthy.
I only have a few seconds. Last word to you, Emily.
Look, Republicans are fully in control of every branch of government, and they can fix this problem if they want to. If you want to tie it to a border wall, let's talk about Mexico, right? Isn't that Trump's big campaign promise? Bring that into the equation. Don't start adding in pieces and more chaos into the immigration system just to fix a problem they created.
All right. Well, surely this is a debate that's going to heat up as we move into the new year. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
Shall be continued. John Scott, meanwhile, happening now, rolling your way in a couple minutes. Hey, John, good morning.
Good morning to you, Bill. The media frenzy over a new book on President Trump's White House. But is the press again focusing too much on gossip while ignoring important issues facing the country? Plus, major talks between North and South Korea this week as the U.S. stands firm it will not tolerate a nuclear North Korea. And Hollywood buzzing after last night's Golden Globe Awards, how Oprah stole the show 10 minutes away.
Big time. See you then, John. 10 minutes away. In a moment here, is your kid addicted to your smartphone? Do you need us to ask you that question? There is a push to study just that. We're going to tell you what it's all about coming up moments away.
Fox News alert, an update now to a story we brought you last hour. NBC has deleted this tweet about Oprah Winfrey potentially running for president during the Golden Globes last night. Oprah fueling speculation of a 2020 run after her fiery speech. NBC just posted the following statement on Twitter. Yesterday, a tweet about the Golden Globes and Oprah Winfrey was sent by a third-party agency for NBC Entertainment in real time during the broadcast. It is in reference to a joke made during the monologue and not meant to be a political statement. We have since removed the tweet. So an update to that story. We'll keep watching it for you.
Meantime, some big investors now calling on Apple to help fight what it considers an addiction to the iPhone and other devices among children. Dr. Mark Siegel, professor of medicine, New York University Langone Medical Center, and a Fox News contributor. You've been looking at this. Why don't you start with usage?
90
young Americans.
Well,
what do you find?
Let's focus on teens. 92% of all teens are using a smartphone on a regular basis. Bill, the Centers for Disease Control says the suicide rate among teens from 2010 to 15 is up 31%, which with 60% of that, 60% increase among young teen girls. You know why? You know why? Because at the same time that this is occurring, Florida State has studied it and found that if you use a smartphone or a device like this for more than 5 hours a day and you're a teen, your chances of having some kind of suicidal behavior, you heard that word right, suicidal behavior is 50%. Here's why. Kids are isolated from each other. They rely on Snapchat or they rely on Instagram, and they see someone else was invited to a party and they weren't, or they're playing video games all day long, or they're searching the internet. Social isolation is occurring. It leads to severe depression, it leads to loneliness, and it leads to despair. This is a huge problem. And France is coming along, by the way, and saying, Bill, we're going to ban smartphone usage from schools, from middle schools, from lower schools. What are we doing here in the United States?
Well, what has Apple said about this?
Apple just received a letter from $2 billion worth of shareholders, one of whom is a teachers association, saying we better have more parental controls on this. Not just, all Apple has right now is a control that you can't buy something, you know, over there in the Apple store without a parent approving. We need controls saying where you're going on this iPhone. I mean, I'm not Big Brother. I'm not 1984 here, but I do believe that parents should have some way of controlling how much a child is using this thing. And that's where we have to go in the United States.
Okay, we'll see what Apple says about that. $2 billion for a $900 billion company is not a lot of money. But you raised very interesting points out of Florida and also the CDC.
One more thing, Bill. In schools, I want schools to say, here's an iPad, use it for school use only.
All right, I could agree with that. And the parents have a big job in this too, though.
Huge. They're very responsible.
Thank you, Dr.
Let's say hello to each other.
Right.
Good to see you.
All right. Sandra.
SpaceX launching its first satellite of the new year into space, but details are being kept under wraps by the U.S. government. We'll tell you why.